Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. Just gonna talk a bit, no five head builds or anything like that today, or at least on this video. I'm just gonna talk about several leveling methods. I'm seeing some frustration about people having to MR grind. It can be incredibly frustrating, and let me tell you, as somebody who's on the other end of it, um, I'm gonna share some tips and tricks that I've used to make it significantly easier. And ultimately, how you basically won't have to hyper farm and like focus farm weapons in terms of like getting them leveled up and like the affinity for them. Um, so we'll start with the new guys and then we'll work up in tiers and then we'll talk about some of the tricks you can use later involving like helmets and stuff like that to really speed up the process. Um, But the fact is that for somebody in my category where I'm LR2, is I don't have to worry about leveling. I haven't had to level or even think about leveling since I hit MR30. The only thing that I might have to worry about is say like the Kuva weapons. And I will power level something if I'm trying to make a build for it and I just want to get the build tested up. But the fact is I haven't focused on leveling anything in a very long time. So for the newer people in the clan and the alliance, welcome to Warframe. One of the things that you're gonna find is the bane of your existence is going to be leveling, and then eventually you will get introduced to something called Forma, and this is gonna kind of consume your life from then on. Um, for the absolute new player, and I am going to cap the minimum at this at MR3, because MR1 and MR2 is literally leveling up your first frame, primary, secondary, melee, and the taxon. Just leveling it up to 30 will get you comfortably past MR2. So this is for people that are building new things, um, are making their way through the star chart. This is going to help you casually gain affinity on your weapons. So the first new bro method for the brand new people, once you've leveled up your frame, primary, secondary, melee, you've gotten the taxon, you have built the taxon, and you have equipped the taxon and its sentinel weapon. Is the first thing, and the best thing is as you're playing through the game, you say you want to level up a secondary weapon. Because of how painful leveling is at lower levels, like I've made new accounts because obviously my memory of what it was like when I first started is a little fuzzy. Um, you can go while playing Warframe 4 to 5 hours and never level up a weapon if you're starting the game out. So getting your first set of levels, getting your first MR, second, is a big deal in terms of time commitment. One of the things you can do is if you once you complete your first level, right? So everything's hit rank 30, your frame's rank 30, your primary is rank 30, secondary melee, you've got the taxon equipped, it's got its sentinel weapon, you've reached 30, and you want to start building stuff. The way that I would recommend is to sort of level without leveling. Have a, like, say you want to level up a secondary, you equip a primary that is rank 30 and a melee that is rank 30. And you just continue to run missions like normal. On the other slot, if you want to level up a secondary, you put the secondary that you want to level up in that slot. And as you go through and you pick up like affinity orbs, and like generic affinity bonuses, and as you go through and play with other people, you will not be leveling that weapon per se, but the affinity share, which is a thing. So if you have an ally, somebody running the same mission with you, and they kill a unit, you get a share of the XP. And that will contribute to the weapon that you're leveling. So it's going to be slow. It's going to take a bit. But this way, you're not stuck in the very, very painful process of sitting on an Earth defense node trying to do the first 10 waves of defense to power level something. Because that sucks. So the first thing I would recommend is just level up the hard way. It's going to suck the first time. Get a primary that you're starting to build up mods. Melee, leave it at 30. But then you get like a secondary, or say you want to level up a melee. So just have 2 weapons that are rank 30. The other one will be your extra affinity, or what you will be leveling, right? And you're just going to, as you casually play the game, let that extra weapon, the unranked one, slowly gain levels. Because the thing that is painful about leveling when you're in the very early game is purely the fact that the enemies just do not grant you a lot of affinity XP toward your ability to level up. They just don't grant that much. When you get later in the game, leveling becomes significantly easier, to the point where you can level something in about 2 minutes. So it is more important to get later in the game to level and complete the star chart. But obviously, you're going to be doing this a lot. There's like 600 something things in the... Actually, I can just check. How many things are there to level? Almost 700 things to level. And it takes a while. So when you first do your first set and you're starting the leveling process, just run your missions like normal. You're not going to be able to cap your capacity early on. It's going to be more important for you to spend your time and to increase your enjoyment in the game by upgrading your mods and collecting mods. So you're going to get your serration on your primary upgraded. You're going to get your fire rate on your primary upgraded. Things like that. Things that actually make you feel stronger are going to be significantly better than any weapon you can get before MR5. So even if it's a Mark 1 Bratton or a regular Bratton, or say, I'm not going to say like Bratton Vandal or the Prime, right? That's a little different. But going from like the Mark 1 Bratton at the beginning, you could even dump the Mark 1 Bratton as soon as you have 25,000 credits, or was it 45,000? It's a small chunk of credits. You'll have it. And just get the regular Bratton and play with that. Because as you collect mods, you're going to be able to upgrade the gun. It's going to do way better. And that will make you feel stronger. So you should be focusing on upgrading mods and doing star chart stuff. On your frame, you're going to go defense. So shield, health, armor on every frame when you're early. Because you can play the game without abilities. You can play the game without energy. But if you're dead, you can't play the game. Right? So that's the philosophy behind it. Just upgrade as you go. Make sure you stay alive. But, okay, so more about leveling. So the first couple of levels is purely going to be, you're going to be getting MR from your first set of levels or from leveling your first group of equipment. So the frame, the primary, the secondary, the melee, the taxon, and the sentinel weapon is going to get you, I think, almost to MR3. So that's a big one. It'll get you out of the first couple of levels. But then as you're going through, you get rid of one of your weapons, and the other slot becomes the slot for the leveling weapon. And you just use the other two weapons. So if you're leveling a secondary, you have a fully ranked primary and melee, and you just let the secondary level as you go. Because this is going to be more focused on having you play the game and enjoy the game. Because as you clear star chart nodes, they give you experience and affinity toward your MR rank. Clearing junctions gives you experience toward your MR rank. And you will level your MR through this and through the weapons that you're passively leveling. So that's very, very early game. It's way more important to upgrade mods than it is to, like, power farm weapons. Now, let's say you've gotten to, like, MR8, MR9, and leveling is becoming a bigger deal. And getting higher MR starts to have a bit of an issue where you need to at least get to 16. So the next group that I'm going to talk about is MR9 to MR16. Because 16 is a big deal. It's the last rank that you can, if you were MR15, you can still be disqualified from ranks on Rivens. At MR16, there is nothing in the game that you can equip. Like, even the Zeraman weapons are MR14, I think is the Fenmore. So at 16, it's all systems go. You can passively level from now on as you keep playing the game. But let's talk about more focused farming, if you will. You're just trying to burn through stuff. What you're going to try to do as you're building up your helmets, as you're getting through Steel Path if you haven't finished it, the fastest method of leveling that is going to be easily accessible is going to be ESO, which you should definitely have unlocked by the time you get to MR16. And what you're going to do is, by this time, you should have a primary or a secondary where you can run missions with that weapon alone. And like before, when you were a lower MR, now you're going to be leveling up everything else, and you're going to have one weapon that does damage. So, like, say I have a rifle, the Paragale right now, a sniper. If I was leveling now, and it was something that I wasn't trying to do a build on, and it was something that I was just going to be using for MR, I would have my pistol, my melee, the sentinel, if that's a thing, the sentinel weapon. I would have them all unranked. And I would have one weapon that I use to deal damage. And I would use that weapon to complete the level. And everything else would just be passively leveling as I went through and completed everything. Because I want to play the game. I don't want to stop what I'm doing and level something. So obviously it's more effective with, like, something that's like a bullet hose weapon, or, like, say, like a Kuva weapon. Like with the Paragale, I wanted to throw some Forma in it, so I went to ESO because I was doing a build on it. But if I wasn't trying to do a build and I viewed the weapon as MR fodder, I would just passively level it and go play the game like normal, but I would have, like, a dead slot, if you will. So this is going to be, it's just the same process as before, but it's going to be twice as fast, or for every weapon and piece of equipment that you have that you're leveling. So let's talk about some quick ways to get big boosts in MR. Okay. If you just want to make it as painless as possible, one of the things you can do to gain fat chunks of MR is actually railjack missions. They're decent credit farms. The mods sell for a truckload of endo. Even if you are on Earth and doing railjack, you can, over the period of a couple weeks, I would say you should be able to do it in like 2 weeks. If you're doing like an hour of railjack a day, farm up 100k endo. Railjack, if you are looking for something that puts out a bunch of like really generic but really needed things like credits, endo, mods, and more importantly in this case, affinity toward MR, the intrinsics are huge early game. If I'm trying to like speed level somebody that I know is like on an alt account where it's not an issue of like, oh, I'm ruining the new game experience for them, but they just want to get to like a decent MR as fast as possible so it's not so painful anymore. If you look where it says mastery breakdown, it's broken down into bigger sections. Not the first section, because I can't hover over it. Actually, hold on. Can I do this? Okay, hold on. I was able to separate my cursor. Railjack intrinsics is 75,000. But it's broken down into 10 ranks for each each intrinsic. And each level of intrinsic gives you about the same affinity towards your MR. So the first couple, say getting them all to level 5, is super quick compared to like getting them to rank 10, because the cost goes up each time. But they all give about the same MR. So if you're looking for a super quick boost, just run as a filler on some railjack missions. You need an archwing, but just run as a filler or try to do like frontal artillery for random missions. But you can do pretty damn well in terms of like MR, and in terms of like if we need to do somebody and we need to boost them up as fast as possible to like MR 11, 12, 13, one of the things we will do is we will piggyback the person on an alt account. They will equip a brand new warframe, a brand new primary, a brand new secondary, a brand new melee. They will try to take a sentinel and a sentinel weapon that hasn't been upgraded, a new companion, and if relevant, they will also take a necromech. And amp also you can do this with. You can also do your archwing, your archgun, and your arch melee all at the same time. But it requires time and it requires a survival. But you can power level all of this stuff and like one rank all the way down. So hold on, we'll do some math. Okay, so you got 6k for the frame, plus 3 for the primary, plus 3 for the secondary, plus 3 for the melee. 6k for the sentinel and the weapon. The archwing is 6, I think. Plus the arch gun, plus the arch melee, potentially an amp, plus a mech. So I'm going to say 3 if it's your first mech. Plus, so you can do 39,000 affinity if it's all new stuff. And then you have the railjack intrinsics on top of it. So you can pump out in like 2 hours. Like, see how right now I'm legendary 2? Legendary 3 in 50,500 affinity. I can farm this up, this amount of affinity, in like an hour if I was a new player. If I didn't have this stuff maxed, and I had a mech, and I had an amp. So once you get to the point where you have an archwing, an archgun, an arch melee, an amp that needs to be leveled, maybe you just built your mech, you haven't focused on the railjack intrinsics, and you have a frame that hasn't been leveled, you have a primary that hasn't been leveled, a secondary, a melee. You just go down and you do level 0 all of it. And you just run missions and sit in the frontal artillery. And ideally go with somebody that knows what the deal is, so they know you're going to be in the front artillery. And you just go run quick missions. And we do this sometimes and throw on to somebody's account 100k affinity or 100k MR in the period of like a couple hours. Because every time you run a mission, as soon as the person's leveled, back to dry dock, they go to the arsenal, swap out everything. So the primary, secondary melee, the warframe, if they level the archwing, the archgun, arch melee, swap everything, and straight back out to another railjack mission. And you can pump out insane amounts of MR this way. Now, it's not quite as fast as focus farming, like hyper focus farming on the fastest methods in terms of affinity per second, but in terms of a more relaxing experience where you are just casually gaining tons of MR, there's a window, because obviously you max railjack intrinsics and it maxes at 75. But if you are in the midst of like MR9 to MR16 and you're trying to get like a level a day, this is a super helpful way of doing it. But it also requires being in a clan or having people that you know that run railjack missions, right? But if that situation comes around, you can pump out some massive MR over the period of like a week. So like MR9 to MR16, it is completely feasible, obviously with some setup, to do that in 7 days. And this is one of the methods that you can do that with. So just keep in mind this exists. So this would be one of the techniques for like really cranking out the MR. But even then, if you're a newer player and you're like down at like MR6, MR7, as long as you have an archwing, you can jump into a railjack mission without a railjack, which also gives you affinity, by the way. What is it? It's called the plexus. That gives you affinity for another 6. And you would just go run railjack missions and you would click join crew constantly. And every time you got out of the mission, you went to the dry dock, you go to back to your orbiter, unless they changed it and you can do it in the dojo now. Obviously, I did this when railjack first came out and you couldn't do it then. But you go back to the orbiter, upgrade your intrinsics. Actually, I think you can do it at the station. Hold on, I'm standing here playing the game. Let me... Oh, it's not going to let me leave from here. We'll go check it right now. Sorry, I'm unprepared. But I want to give accurate information. I think you can do it at the kiosk now. Okay, here. Yeah, these. So you can do it from the dry dock. You would go to Arsenal. So your loop would be... Say you just leveled everything up. You're in the ship. You're in the dry dock. right? You load in. You're going to go to equipment, arsenal. It warps you to navigation, right? So I'm here now. You would swap everything out. And then you would go fast travel, dry dock. Go to intrinsics, level this. And you would do even across the board because you're trying to get a MR, right? So you would go across the board, like left to right or whatever you want, because you're just trying to get his MR as fast as possible. Don't really worry about hyper focusing on anything. If you've got like 2 ranks in these, don't worry about it, and really don't worry about it picking one until you get to like rank 5 going across everything, right? Because what is it? The Veil is 7. And once you upgrade, you're unranked, back in the ship. And off you go, you're leveling more. And in terms of affinity per, I guess, like minute or second or hour, or however you want to break it down, this is a pretty good farm. Because every other method above this, in terms of like an MR farm, admittedly, requires you to essentially stop playing the game and focus on farming MR. So in terms of like passively gaining MR, especially at those middle tiers, if you will, this is a big boon for MR gaining or MR farming and getting your rank up. Now, obviously, if you don't like Railjack, well, you're not going to get the benefit of it. But guess what? You got to get intrinsics anyway. Especially if your goal is to be like MR30, LR1, or whatever, or even my rank, LR2. This is just how you would do it. And even if you're brand new and you're like doing Earth nodes, it doesn't matter. Just run with your friends that you've made and do Earth missions. As you guys increase intrinsics, you can upgrade the planets as you go, clear nodes, get higher intrinsics, and once you unlock the Veil, you just kind of plant your ass there. So, that's sort of what the deal is. Now, let's talk about later game. I'm going to assume at this point, you have a pretty good idea of how to farm. So we're going to do, or how to get farm MR, how to power level. So let's talk about the, like if you really want to knock out something, and I'm not going to discuss too much, obviously, the benefits of MR, because if you're like MR28, you really don't need advice on how to hyper farm something specifically. So I'm going to go over some highlight points. I would highly recommend, if you're MR28, MR29, and you really don't care about getting to MR30, because obviously with 30, it's a big deal in terms of, let me see if I can find something that's unranked. Okay, so this Orthos, I don't even know why I have this. And I have a catalyst in it, God. Is unranked, no Forma. But if you notice, catalyst, okay, a catalyst doubles my capacity for any new people listening to this. Takes me from 30 max capacity to 60. This is not a Kuva weapon, so it doesn't go any higher. But one of the benefits of being MR30 and higher is that I no longer have to level. I just pick a weapon up, and I have max capacity, and I just run around with it. And when it's ranked up to 30, I just throw another Forma in it. The other exception is the Kuva weapons. Okay, so this one, hold on, let me find one with a partial. It doesn't matter. I'll just, okay. So as you Forma Tenet weapons and Kuva weapons, right? If you've ranked, every time you rank it up, you gain 2 capacity. And it bumps you way up. and allows you to fit a ton of primed mods and the more capacity draining mods, right? But the extra capacity helps a lot. One of the things that I guess, because I'm guilty of it too, but myself being Legend 2, which is the equivalent of MR32, when I forma a Kuva or a Tenet weapon that has like 6 or like 4, 5, or 6 forma into it, obviously 5 is the one that increases the capacity the highest. And also the paracesis, because right, that one goes up also. You still gain the additional capacity. So where for a regular weapon you would have 30, right? Because I'm LR2 or MR32 again, I start at 32 instead of losing all of the capacity and getting dragged back down to like a 30 capacity weapon. I will have, because I'm LR2, a 32 capacity weapon, provided I've formed it one time. So you still do gain the benefit, but it's relegated exclusively to the Kuva and Tenet weapons, and obviously the paracesis. But let's be honest, if you're LR2 and you've never seen a paracesis, explain to me how, right? So there is still a benefit. Obviously, it gets relegated to something really tiny. But hold on, I gotta have a Kuva weapon that's not ranked all the way up. I never formed this. Actually, hold on for the video. Here we go. No, I haven't ranked it. Alright, whatever. Okay, so see, I'm 38. 38 times 2 is 76. It's at 5. You have to double it because I have a catalyst in it. But look, because I'm LR2, I gain the additional capacity. So instead of it being 60 out of 60 because of the catalyst, I'm at 64 out of 64 because I'm LR2. So you do gain the benefit, as I waste a form on something that really doesn't need it. But anyway, there you go, proof, right? So if you're hyper farming something, if you're hyper farming MR and you're just trying to get junk out of the way to increase your MR, the king and the easiest and most repeatable one is to go in with a group of people that are all sort of in the same situation as you. Wait for a double affinity weekend. Everybody pops like an affinity booster. You unequip everything, and you try to get a carry for ESO, and you leech with somebody that's helping you. I do this a lot for people, where I'll be the nuke, and we'll just power farm stuff. You sit in the relay, you've got your double XP booster from the weekend, you've got everybody's running affinity boosters. You even go to the relay, and I'll pop an affinity blessing. And you can farm a primary, secondary, and a melee in a wave. Okay, so 2.5 minutes. Or was it 2:40? I think it's 2.5. 3? It's no more than 3. Maybe with loading. In 3 minutes, you can farm 9k affinity in like 3 minutes. It's ridiculously fast. But the downside is you're literally not doing anything else. And for frames, I think the king of doing it like leveling them the first time specifically, is still like stealth kill Adaro. I'm pretty sure there's a faster method now, but everything else starts getting pretty sweaty, and a lot of it involves like somebody else helping you. And for me, I just want to play the game. A lot of times, I'll throw on like the triple Umbra mods and Arcane Guardian and Arcane Grace, and literally just go play the game and just health tank, because that's an incredibly tanky frame, right? The Umbral mods and like an unranked adaptation with Guardian and Grace, and just run missions, and that will literally be how I level, because I hate sitting in ESO. But that's me though. So this is a couple of points, especially for those of you that don't like ESO. Listen, just tank up the frame and just go run missions. Guardian Grace, I'm assuming you got him. And do like an unranked adaptation. It's an easy setup, right? So it is what it is. But this is some pointers in like the 3 separate categories. There are plenty of videos. Oh, and for the love of God, don't sit in Hydron. Do not go to Hydron. I understand people say go to Hydron. Don't go to Hydron. Go to this node. Go to Helene. Okay, and the reason being is the resources. Okay, nanospores, plastids, orokin cells, detonite ampules. It takes you the same number of waves to cap or to max your frame as Hydron, but the difference is look at the garbage resources. Look at it. Rubido, alloy plate, salvage, detonite ampule. Okay, so the detonite ampule is kind of good. But Rubido, who cares? Alloy plate, who cares? That being said, unless you're doing it's the neutrino upgrade segment. What's that one that's a monster? No. Yeah, unless you're farming this up. Because if you notice, it's 120,000 alloy plate. So if you're farming this up, maybe do Hydron. But if you don't need it, or you have a bunch, then go to Helene. The Orokin cells are just way better, especially if you're trying to kit up weapons. So don't use Hydron unless you're like specifically farming or you need alloy plate. So go to Helene. It's way better. Because basically you'll end up having to farm on Hydron and sit there, and that is a horrible game to play. Sitting in Hydron for hours and hours and hours. As somebody who did it, don't do that. And also, another note. One of the things that is also, once you get later in the game, spoiler, I'm not going to say how you get this, but there will be a thing that everybody has to do that will unlock this portion of the star chart. It sits out here on the left. There are certain mini bosses that show up once per level. They give you a hell of a lot of affinity. So you can run bounties out here and level stuff really fast. And the bonus is this is the content you're supposed to be doing anyway. Right? And there's also more spoiler note. I'm going to keep it because it is fresh. If you haven't unlocked it, there are also some nodes out here. These two here, where you can farm literally a weapon. You just take like a primary or a secondary that can kill, and everything else, like you have like a frame that's leveled that you can keep alive, and you just run with like a secondary that can kill, and you level up a primary and a melee at the same time. So every time you run the mission, you go in, do like a rotation C, and you come out with 2 weapons that are leveled. Is also a completely valid way of doing it. But you get the gist where it's like, go to content that you would be doing anyway and passively level something as you're there. So instead of having a primary, secondary, and melee, you would take a primary that you have built, and you would level the secondary and the melee. And you would just rely on the primary to do damage. And you would rely on, like, affinity sharing to level the other 2 weapons. And you would just run missions, and each day you can easily get, like, 5 secondaries and 5 melees leveled. If you play for, like, 2-3 hours. And just every day you log on, you're gaining a couple thousand MR each day. And it's pretty solid. Like, it's... Because this way, instead of, like, hyper farming, when you do it this way, you're gaining it passively, and you're not stuck. Okay? Which is the reason why I'm kind of making this video. Is, one of the people I play with said they had gotten stuck at an MR. And there's no reason to be stuck unless you hate farming. You just grab something that isn't leveled. You take a primary or a melee if you're leveling a secondary. I can only say it so many times, right? You take a primary or secondary that's powerful, and the other 2 are MR fodder. And you level that way. And you just play the nodes like normal. So that's how you would passively game an MR at a reasonable clip, honestly. So you're not killing yourself and killing your enjoyment of the game by sitting in ESO or Hydron, especially Hydron, and even Helene to some extent. At least Helene is a more beneficial version of Hydron. It's even the same tile set. So this is going to make gaining MR passively significantly more enjoyable. And the only thing you would maybe modify is, as you're going through and leveling, you're obviously going to have stuff that you want to work on, like specific weapons. Like, say you want to knock out the market, right? All the BPs on the market is a good place to start. And you want to bank Forma to work on the dojo weapons. You would work through, and obviously you're going to start picking up credits as you're picking up blueprints. You will then make the weapon, but as you go through, you'll get like 5 weapons off the market, and that will give you a shopping list for the day. And you are then going to go around and run missions on the planets that give you those resources, right? So you're just going to passively level as you complete them, make the decision whether you're going to trash them instantly once you've leveled them or keep them. Obviously, it's slot dependent, but this way you're not stuck, which is a horrible place to feel. Like, if you feel like you're stuck at a specific MR, to be honest, the answer is probably something you're just not aware of, or something you forgot. Because this game doesn't really tell you a lot of like what direction you're supposed to go. Everybody tells you to do the star chart, and you get experience from that. You get MR. Like here, where it says missions, and then the Steel Path missions. They give you MR. The junctions give you MR. I think it's 1,000 each junction. Unless that's been changed. I think it's 1,000 each. So the first couple of levels are going to be helped out immensely by just completing the star chart. Completing nodes. I forget exactly what that gives. It gives some weird number. But anyway. Here's my overall talk about how to gain MR and not hyper farm on it. Because the only purpose of hyper farming affinity is later game when you have a build that you're trying to do. There's just no reason to farm up something like that anymore, especially at my level. But these were the tricks that I would use and the stuff that I use now. Where it's just you equip the weapon, you rely on affinity, like affinity sharing, because the levels are so much higher. The higher you get into the star chart and then steel path, the more effective affinity sharing is. Because eventually it gets to the point where if you run a 10-minute mission, everything's leveled. Like, I'm forming stuff every mission now, especially with the new farms. People are staying for an hour, and I'm fine with that. But at least stay for like a rotation C, especially if you're doing the Varuna stuff, so you have a chance of getting everything. Like, don't do 5 minutes and then bounce. You're never going to complete it. So do rotation C so you get a chance of picking everything, and then bounce. And that is going to be an incredibly easy farm nowadays. And I think this is the fastest way right now. Is the steel path, yeah, conjunction survival. I'm pretty sure this is the fastest way to power level stuff. So you could go in with like a sentinel weapon, go in with like a built frame, even an amp that you're trying to level. Equip that also. An archwing gun that you're trying to level, and just power level everything. Just make sure to pull out the archwing gun and use it, because if you don't, I don't think it gains affinity at all. But this is one of the more effective affinity farms now because of the enemy level being so high. And especially on Steel Path. What is it? A 180 to 200? Good lord, those numbers are starting to get up there for starting missions. So, it is what it is. Here's my TED Talk. Y'all have a blessed day. And if there's any questions about this, because Warframe's a grind. It's supposed to be. And I wouldn't mind expanding this into maybe another video. But like the Adaro stealth farm, listen, I get it's quick, but the fact is it costs you Helminth resources, and you have to stop running missions. Like, just go to like some node, right? Like, just do 5 minutes of something you would be farming anyway, and generally you can level it. The cheese build that I would use, and I use this on basically everything, is you would take like a Panzer, right? And if you're doing Steel Path, you should have one of these. The Hunter Recovery mod, right? And you would literally, like, even with no arcanes, it's pretty reasonable. Adaptation. You would do armor, health, in whatever order you wanted. Okay, so I have triple umber on him. So we'll just use this as an example. Alright, so you would literally just throw something on like this. Just get as tanky as possible. Decent amount of health and armor. And say, like, rolling guard. And health conversion can also be super helpful with stuff like this. To get your armor up. And you would just run missions. And as you level up, you would forma as you go. So, it's food for thought. It is what it is. Obviously, if you don't have a triple umber set, and you probably don't, you would just do like a regular vitality, a regular fiber, skip the intensify, do shields. Or if you're shield gating or know you can shield gate, mod appropriately. But then you could do just like more health and armor. Sorry about that. So like the Karnus mod, Saxum, I forget the other one. But yeah, stuff like this, where it's like health and armor, and just make sure you're as tanky as possible and just go run missions. Everything, I think, except for the conjunction survival, you can easily cheese like this. At least doing like 5 minutes, even like a Kuva Fortress survival, right, Tavuni? So, there you go. Anyway, Baruch Prime should be coming out pretty soon. Expect to build. Have a blessed day, guys.